My name is Victoria, and at 35 years old, I have built a restaurant empire that most people in the culinary industry would envy. But my own family never saw my potential. I still remember standing outside our family diner, hearing my father laugh in my face as he said, "You will never step foot in our restaurants." Little did he know, I already owned the entire chain, including the very ground he stood on. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from in the comments and hit subscribe to hear more stories about proving doubters wrong. I grew up in Detroit in a family whose identity was deeply intertwined with the restaurant business. My parents, Richard and Patricia, owned and operated a modest neighborhood diner with 60 seats near the industrial district. The Motor City Grill, as it was called, had been in our family for 2 generations, and my father made it clear from the beginning that my older brother Brandon would be the one to carry on the legacy. Our home was the small apartment above the restaurant, so my earliest memories are filled with the sounds of sizzling grills, the smell of fresh coffee brewing, and the constant clatter of plates and silverware during rush hours. While other kids went to summer camp, my summers were spent helping the kitchen staff prep vegetables, assisting the waitresses during busy lunch rushes, and cleaning tables after the dinner crowd left. A restaurant is like a living organism, my father would tell Brandon during their daily walks through the dining room before opening. You have to feel its rhythm, understand its heartbeat. I would trail behind them, eager to learn, but my father rarely acknowledged my presence during these lessons. When I asked questions, he would pat my head and say, "This is business talk, Victoria. Why not help your mother with the flower arrangements for the tables?" By the time I was 12, I could efficiently handle the register, take orders without writing anything down, and even help coordinate kitchen timing during busy periods. But whenever I showed my capabilities, my father would find something to criticize. "You took too long with table 7, he would say, or "You gave away free dessert when we could have charged full price." Brandon, 3 years my senior, received nothing but praise for the same tasks. "You have the instinct, son," my dad would say, proudly placing a hand on Brandon's shoulder. "You understand what it takes to run a business." My mother was kinder, but no more supportive of my interest in the restaurant business. "Victoria, dear, you're so good with people," she would say. "Perhaps you should consider being a teacher or a social worker instead." The unspoken message was clear. The restaurant business was not for women, especially not for me. Despite this constant discouragement, my passion for the culinary industry only grew stronger. I started noticing things my father and brother overlooked: regular customers who preferred certain tables, peak times when we needed more staff, the outdated cash register system that caused unnecessary delays. I began keeping a notebook of ideas for improvements, changes that could enhance customer experience and increase revenue. When I was 16, I gathered my courage and presented my ideas during a staff meeting. I had prepared a detailed presentation about updating our menu, implementing a customer loyalty program, and renovating the dated dining room. My father listened silently, his expression unreadable. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then he laughed. Not a gentle chuckle, but a dismissive laugh that echoed in the small back office. "Social media and loyalty cards?" he scoffed. "That is all nonsense, Victoria. Restaurants are about good food and honest service, not fancy marketing tricks." The staff shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Brandon smirked. My cheeks burned with humiliation as I gathered my notes and slipped out of the room. That night, I cried into my pillow, not from sadness, but from frustration. I knew my ideas were sound. I knew the restaurant business was changing, and we needed to change with it. That same year, our restaurant faced its first major crisis. A new chain restaurant opened just 2 blocks away, featuring modern decor and competitive pricing. Our customer base dropped by 25% within 8 weeks. I watched as my father stubbornly refused to lower our prices or invest in upgrades. We offer quality and tradition, he insisted during tense family dinners. These new places are all style and no substance. Our loyal customers will come back. But they did not come back, at least not in the numbers we needed. I suggested using some of our savings to update the most outdated equipment, but my father dismissed the idea immediately. We are not wasting money on unnecessary changes. We will weather this storm the way we always have, by working harder and staying true to our values. The working harder part meant longer hours for everyone, including me. I spent my weekends and evenings after school working as a waitress, often until 11 at night, then waking up at 5 in the morning to help prepare for the breakfast crowd before school. Brandon, meanwhile, was given more management responsibilities. He implemented cost-cutting measures like switching to cheaper ingredients that affected food quality and reducing portion sizes for popular dishes. Customer complaints increased, but my father blamed the economy, not our declining standards. By some miracle, or perhaps because of a factory contract that brought consistent business for 4 months straight, the restaurant survived that crisis. My father saw it as vindication of his traditional approach. I saw it as a missed opportunity to evolve. Throughout high school, I continued to work at the restaurant while maintaining excellent grades. I joined the business club and focused my studies on accounting, marketing, and food service management. I applied to colleges with strong culinary arts programs, determined to learn what my family refused to teach me. The day my acceptance letter from the Culinary Institute of America arrived was both the happiest and most tense day of my young life. Over dinner that evening, I announced my plans to attend one of the most prestigious culinary programs in the country. My father put down his fork and stared at me. "And how do you plan to pay for this fancy education?" he asked, his voice already carrying disapproval. "I have a partial scholarship," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "And I will work part-time. I have been saving money for years." "All that money and time wasted," he sighed, shaking his head, "when you could be here, learning the business from the ground up, the real way." "But you have never let me learn the real business," I said, my voice finally breaking. "You have never taken me seriously." "Because this is not a game, Victoria. This is our livelihood, our legacy. Brandon understands that. You just want to play restaurant owner with fancy degrees and big ideas." My mother reached for my hand under the table, a silent gesture of comfort, but she said nothing to contradict my father. Brandon watched the exchange with a smug expression, secure in his position as the chosen successor. That night, I made a decision that would change the course of my life. I would go to culinary school. I would excel in my studies, and someday I would build a restaurant empire that would make the Motor City Grill look like the outdated, poorly managed establishment it was becoming. Not out of spite, but because I truly loved the food service industry and knew I could do better. 2 months later, I packed my bags and left for Hyde Park, New York. My mother cried at the airport. My father gave me a stiff hug and reminded me that there would always be a job waiting tables if my big plans did not work out. Brandon did not even come to say goodbye. Little did they know that the shy, underestimated daughter they had dismissed for years was about to embark on a journey that would ultimately bring their family business full circle in ways none of them could have imagined. The Culinary Institute of America felt like entering another world. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who shared my passion for food service and took my ideas seriously. My professors recognized my practical experience and encouraged me to combine it with innovative thinking. During class discussions about restaurant operations, I often found myself drawing on real examples from the Motor City Grill. Sometimes it's cases of what not to do. To cover expenses that my partial scholarship did not handle, I worked 25 hours a week at the American Bounty restaurant, the school's fine dining establishment. Unlike at home, my supervisors valued my input and gave me increasing responsibilities. By my sophomore year, I was training new student employees and participating in management meetings. During my junior year, I landed a coveted weekend position at The Gauge, a five-star restaurant in nearby Poughkeepsie. This is where I met Eleanor Thompson, the executive chef who would become my first true mentor. In her 50s, Eleanor had worked her way up from prep cook to running one of the most successful independent restaurants in the Hudson Valley. "I see myself in you, Victoria," she told me one evening as we reviewed the weekend revenue reports. "Smart, observant, and constantly underestimated because you are a woman in this business." Eleanor took me under her wing, inviting me to supplier meetings, teaching me about cost control, and showing me how to handle difficult situations with both customers and staff. She introduced me to industry contacts and recommended me for a summer internship with Premium Dining Group, one of the top restaurant chains in the country. That summer internship in Manhattan opened doors I never knew existed. Premium Dining Group's approach to hospitality was worlds away from my family's outdated methods. They used data analytics to predict customer preferences, employed psychological research to design dining experiences, and invested heavily in staff training and retention. I worked 80-hour weeks absorbing everything I could and impressing my supervisors with my dedication and quick learning. At the end of the internship, the regional director called me into his office. "You have a natural talent for this business," he said. "We would like to put you in our management track program after graduation." I called home that night bursting with excitement. My mother answered, and I could hear the pride in her voice as I shared my news. Then my father came on the line. "So you're going to work for the competition instead of your own family? After all we've done for you?" "Dad, this is an amazing opportunity," I tried to explain. "I can learn so much and bring that knowledge back to help our restaurant. We do not need your fancy corporate ideas. Brandon is doing a fine job modernizing things his way, the right way." I later learned that modernizing meant that Brandon had convinced my father to invest in a new sound system and updated menu covers, while still using the same outdated point-of-sale system and ignoring online reviews that complained about slow service and inconsistent food quality. When I returned to culinary school for my senior year, I threw myself into my studies with renewed determination. I graduated magna cum laude and accepted the position with Premium Dining Group in New York City. The starting salary was more than my father had ever paid any of his managers, and the training program was renowned in the industry. My first year in New York was a whirlwind of learning and advancement. I rotated through every department, from kitchen prep to front of house management to marketing. I worked directly with customers and behind the scenes. I learned about vendor relations and expansion strategies. By the end of that year, I was promoted to assistant manager at one of their flagship properties in Midtown Manhattan. In my new role, I implemented several initiatives that increased customer satisfaction scores and boosted revenue. I created a personalized dining experience for regular customers that was later adopted by all Premium Dining Group locations nationwide. My ideas were not just heard, they were valued and implemented. I called home monthly, trying to maintain a connection with my family. My mother always sounded happy to hear from me, asking about my life in New York and sharing small updates about home. My father would briefly come on the line, asking when I was coming to my senses and returning to Detroit. Brandon rarely spoke to me at all. During my second year in New York, I flew home for Thanksgiving. The Motor City Grill looked exactly the same, except perhaps a bit more worn around the edges. The dining room furniture was showing signs of age, the flooring was scuffed, and the kitchen equipment still ran the same outdated systems. Over dinner, I carefully tried to share some insights from my work experience, suggestions that could help the family business without requiring major investment. Brandon immediately shot down every idea. "We do not need to pamper customers with all these extra touches," he said dismissively. "Our business model works fine as it is." "Does it?" I asked gently. "What are your profit margins these days?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "We are holding steady at around 15%. Industry standard for a well-performing restaurant in our category should have been at least 22%. I knew then that the restaurant was struggling, but my family was too proud to admit it or accept help. After that visit, my calls home became less frequent. It was too painful to watch from a distance as the business I loved slowly declined due to stubbornness and outdated practices. Meanwhile, my career continued to flourish. By my 26th birthday, I had been promoted to general manager of the Midtown property, becoming one of the youngest GMs in the company's history. The restaurant under my management saw an 18% increase in revenue and received numerous industry awards for innovation and customer satisfaction. I was featured in Restaurant Business magazine as a rising star and invited to speak at industry conferences. My salary and bonuses allowed me to build a substantial savings account, and I began to dream of something bigger, my own restaurant. One evening, while having dinner with Eleanor Thompson, who had since moved to New York to oversee a boutique restaurant collection, I shared my vision. "I want to create something different," I told her. "A restaurant that combines the efficiency and data-driven approach of the big chains with the personal touch and character of a family-owned establishment. But I do not know if I'm ready to make that leap." Eleanor reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Victoria, you have been ready for years. The only question is whether you are brave enough to bet on yourself the way I would bet on you in a heartbeat." That conversation was the catalyst I needed. The next day, I began researching locations, developing a business plan, and exploring financing options. At 27, with 8 years of industry experience but limited personal capital, I knew I would face challenges. But for the first time in my life, I also knew without a doubt that I was capable of overcoming them. What I did not know then was that my path to building my own restaurant empire would eventually lead me back to where it all began, with a confrontation that would change everything. Securing funding for my first restaurant was even more difficult than I had anticipated. Despite my impressive resume and meticulously detailed business plan, most banks and investors were reluctant to back such an ambitious project led by a 27-year-old woman. "Your concept is interesting," one investor told me after reviewing my proposal, "but perhaps you should aim smaller for your first independent venture. A food truck, maybe?" Another suggested I find a more experienced partner to lend credibility to the project, preferably a male partner. I left that meeting fuming, but more determined than ever. After 28 rejections, I finally met Marcus Hayes, a retired restaurant executive who had made his fortune developing casual dining chains in the 80s and 90s. Unlike the others, Marcus focused on my ideas and experience rather than my age or gender. "The industry is changing," he said after our 3-hour meeting. "The old boys club is dying out, and the future belongs to innovators who understand what modern diners really want. I think you are one of those innovators." With Marcus's backing and my life savings, I secured a location in Brooklyn that had previously been a small, underperforming bistro. The location was excellent, close to public transportation and in an up-and-coming neighborhood, but the space needed significant renovations. I renamed it the Madison, after my favorite historical figure, and developed a concept that will become the foundation of my future empire. A casual fine dining restaurant that offered upscale cuisine at accessible prices, with technology enhancing rather than replacing the human element of service. The renovation took 9 months, during which I oversaw every detail from the custom-designed seating to the locally sourced ingredients for our menu. I hired staff who shared my vision of dining as an experience and trained them personally. I developed proprietary software that allowed us to track customer preferences and anticipate their needs without being intrusive. The Madison opened with little fanfare, but quickly gained attention through word of mouth and social media. Our approach resonated with diners tired of both impersonal chain restaurants and overpriced fine dining establishments. Within 7 months, we were operating at 92% capacity during peak hours, well above the industry average, especially for a new establishment. Food blogs featured us as a hidden gem and a game changer in Brooklyn dining. Magazines requested interviews about our unique approach. Business professionals became regular customers, praising our seamless service and innovative menu. Younger diners appreciated our sustainable practices and community connections. During this time, I never mentioned my success to my family. Our phone conversations had dwindled to brief calls on birthdays and holidays, and I had not visited Detroit in over 3 years. My mother occasionally asked about my restaurant job in New York, and I would vaguely mention that things were going well. I was waiting to prove myself beyond any doubt before sharing what I had accomplished. With the Madison success, investors who had previously rejected me now approached with offers for financing for expansion. Marcus advised me to move carefully to ensure any new locations maintained the same quality and vision. 18 months after opening the Madison, I acquired a second location in Philadelphia, followed 8 months later by a third in Boston. Each new restaurant followed the Madison model, but with unique elements reflecting the local culture and culinary traditions. I named the Philadelphia location the Franklin and the Boston one the Adams, continuing the American historical theme. As my small collection of restaurants grew, I formalized the business structure, creating Victoria Restaurants Group as the parent company. I assembled a core team of culinary and management professionals who shared my vision, many of whom I had worked with at Premium Dining Group. I instituted profit sharing for all employees, from dishwashers to managers, ensuring everyone had a stake in our success. By my 32nd birthday, Victoria Restaurants Group operated 12 locations along the East Coast, each profitable and highly rated. Industry publications started referring to us as the fastest growing independent restaurant group and the new standard in accessible fine dining. I was invited to give keynote speeches at culinary conferences and consulted by larger chains interested in our approach to customer experience. Throughout this period of growth, I maintained a low personal profile. In media coverage, I preferred to highlight our restaurants and team rather than myself. I use the company name rather than my own in business dealings whenever possible. This was partly a strategic decision to focus attention on the brand rather than the founder, but it also meant that news of my success remained largely unknown to my family. My carefully constructed professional life was completely separate from my family history. None of my employees or industry contacts knew about the Motor City Grill or my roots in a family restaurant business. I had built something entirely my own from the ground up, exactly as I had dreamed of doing when I left Detroit. What I did not realize was that these two worlds, so carefully kept apart, were about to collide in a way I could never have anticipated. 9 years after leaving Detroit, I received an unexpected call from my mother. It was unusual for her to call in the middle of a weekday, and her voice sounded strained when I answered. "Victoria, how are you, dear?" she asked with forced cheerfulness. "I'm fine, Mom. Is everything okay there?" There was a pause, then a sigh. "Well, not exactly. The restaurant is having some difficulties." Over the next 30 minutes, my mother revealed what I had long suspected. The Motor City Grill was in serious financial trouble. Customer traffic had dropped below 50% of capacity. They had mortgaged the building twice to cover operating costs. 4 months earlier, they had missed a loan payment for the first time in the restaurant's history. "Your father does not know I am calling you," she admitted. "He and Brandon are still so proud. But I am worried, Victoria. This restaurant is our home, our livelihood. Your father is 67 now, too old to start over if we lose everything." "What about Brandon?" I asked. I thought he was managing things. Another pause. Brandon has made some choices that have not worked out well. He invested heavily in a complete kitchen renovation with equipment we could not afford. He also took out loans for a bar expansion that never attracted the clientele he expected. After we hung up, I sat at my desk staring out at the Manhattan skyline. My first instinct was to book a flight to Detroit immediately to offer help, advice, money, whatever they needed. But I knew my father and brother would reject any direct assistance from me. Their pride would not allow them to admit that they had been wrong, that the restaurant business had changed in exactly the ways I had predicted years ago. I needed to find another way to help, one that would preserve their dignity while saving the business they had devoted their lives to building. After a week of consideration, I developed a plan. Victoria Restaurant Group would make an offer to acquire the Motor City Grill through a holding company with me as the anonymous principal investor. We would offer a fair price, well above what the struggling property was actually worth on paper, and include provisions to retain all current staff. I contacted a respected Detroit business attorney with no previous connection to my family or my company to act as intermediary. I briefed him thoroughly on the situation, but swore him to secrecy regarding my identity. As far as my family would know, the offer was coming from a restaurant investment group interested in expanding into the Detroit market. 2 weeks later, my attorney met with my father and Brandon. He presented our offer, a purchase price 25% above market value, guaranteed employment for all current staff for at least 18 months, and the option for my parents to maintain residence in their apartment for 3 years, rent-free. My father was initially suspicious and resistant, according to my attorney's report. "This restaurant has been in our family for 2 generations. We are not selling to some faceless corporation." But the financial reality was impossible to ignore. They were 4 months behind in loan payments. Foreclosure was becoming a real possibility. After a week of deliberation, and I later learned several heated arguments between my father and Brandon, they agreed to meet again to discuss terms. The second meeting included their bank representative, who made it clear that without significant financial intervention, they would lose the restaurant entirely within months. Faced with this stark reality, my father reluctantly agreed to the sale with one additional condition. He wanted to remain involved as a consultant for the transition period. I approved this condition immediately, knowing it would help him save face and ease the transition. The paperwork was drawn up, and 90 days later, Victoria Restaurant Group officially acquired the Motor City Grill. Throughout this process, I maintained my distance and anonymity. I monitored the proceedings through my attorney and financial team, but did not visit Detroit or directly involve myself in any way. The acquisition was handled like any other business transaction, with thorough due diligence and professional courtesy. What my team discovered during the due diligence process was worse than I had feared. Beyond the Motor City Grill, my father and Brandon had acquired 2 smaller restaurants in neighboring cities over the past decade, both of which were also underperforming and carrying significant debt. These had been funded largely by leveraging the original restaurant, putting the entire small chain at risk of collapse. I decided to acquire all 3 properties, restructuring the debt and bringing them under the Victoria Restaurant Group umbrella. It was a significant financial commitment, stretching our resources thinner than I would have preferred. But I could not bear the thought of my family losing everything they had worked for. My plan was to renovate and rebrand all 3 restaurants gradually, starting with the smaller properties and saving the Motor City Grill for last. This would allow time for my operations team to assess each location thoroughly and develop appropriate concepts that would honor the history of the properties while updating them to meet current market demands. Throughout the acquisition and initial planning phase, I continued to run Victoria Restaurant Group from New York, participating in daily conference calls with my Detroit team, but never revealing my connection to the properties. To my staff, this was simply another strategic expansion into the Midwest market. 8 months after the acquisition, the renovation of the first two smaller properties was complete, and they reopened under new names as part of the Victoria Restaurant Group. Customer reviews were overwhelmingly positive, and revenue climbed steadily. Both locations went from operating at a loss to profitability within 6 months. Finally, it was time to address the Motor City Grill, the property that shaped my childhood and launched my career in the restaurant industry, albeit in ways my family had never intended. I wanted its transformation to be special, a showcase for everything I had learned and accomplished in the decades since leaving home. I approved an extensive renovation plan that would preserve the historic character of the building while completely modernizing the kitchen infrastructure and dining room amenities. The budget was generous, the timeline ambitious. I handpicked the design team and contractors, reviewed every detail of the plans, and monitored progress through daily photo updates and video calls. As the renovation neared completion, I faced a decision. Should I reveal myself as the new owner before or during the grand reopening? After much consideration, I decided that the reopening celebration would be the perfect moment to bring my journey full circle. I would invite my family as honored guests, and in front of industry colleagues and press, I would finally step out from behind the corporate identity I had built and reclaim my personal history. I had no illusion that this revelation would instantly heal the rifts in my family. But I hoped that seeing what I had accomplished, how I had saved and transformed the business they loved, might begin a process of reconciliation. At the very least, it would finally force them to acknowledge the success I had achieved on my own terms. With that decision made, I booked a flight to Detroit for the first time in years, prepared to face my past and reveal the truth that had been hidden for so long. The renovated restaurant, now renamed the Roosevelt, in keeping with my presidential theme, was nearly unrecognizable from the tired establishment my family had struggled to maintain. The dining room featured an open kitchen concept with a custom wood-fired grill. The seating combined modern comfort with classic Detroit industrial elements. The menu, crafted by a respected local chef, showcased regional cuisine with contemporary techniques. For the grand reopening, we invited local business leaders, culinary industry representatives, food bloggers, and press. I personally signed the invitations sent to my family, though they were addressed from the management of Victoria Restaurant Group rather than from me directly. They were designated as special VIP guests with access to all areas of the celebration. I arrived in Detroit 3 days before the event, staying incognito at a downtown hotel while overseeing final preparations. On the morning of the reopening, I visited the property early, walking through each area and thanking the staff for their hard work. Many were original employees who had stayed through the transition, though they did not yet know my connection to the former owners. At 6:30 that evening, guests began to arrive for the cocktail reception and restaurant tour. I watched from a private office as the dining room filled with Detroit's culinary elite, business officials, and media representatives. And then finally, I saw them. My father, looking older and frailer than I remembered. My mother, elegant in a navy dress she had probably purchased specially for the occasion. Brandon, still carrying himself with that air of superiority, and a woman I assumed was his wife, whom I had never met. They were greeted by the general manager, who had been briefed that morning about my relationship to them, but sworn to secrecy until the official announcement. He escorted them to the VIP area, where they would wait until the formal program began. At 7:15, I took a deep breath and stepped onto the small stage that had been set up in the main dining room. The room quieted as I approached the microphone. Good evening, and thank you all for joining us to celebrate the newest addition to the Victoria Restaurant Group family. I began scanning the crowd until I located my family near the back of the room. They were watching with polite interest, clearly not recognizing me at first in my tailored suit, with my hair styled differently than they had ever seen it. The building we stand in today has a rich history in Detroit dining, one that I am intimately familiar with. You see, I grew up in this restaurant. A murmur ran through the crowd. I saw the exact moment recognition dawned on my father's face, his expression shifting from polite attention to shock. My name is Victoria Marshall, founder and CEO of Victoria Restaurant Group. But to the former owners of this property, I was simply Victoria, the daughter who left home to pursue a dream in the culinary industry. The room was absolutely silent now. My mother had her hand pressed to her mouth. Brandon was whispering furiously to his wife. I continued my speech, briefly outlining the growth of Victoria Restaurant Group and our vision for the Roosevelt as our flagship Midwest property. I thanked the staff who had stayed through the transition and acknowledged the design and construction teams. Throughout, I kept my tone professional and positive, making no reference to the family tensions or financial troubles that had preceded the acquisition. I invite you all to explore the property, enjoy the culinary creations of our executive chef, and experience firsthand the blend of classic Detroit hospitality and modern dining excellence that defines the Roosevelt. Thank you. The applause was enthusiastic, but I barely heard it. My eyes were fixed on my family. My father had gone pale. Brandon looked angry. My mother seemed to be on the verge of tears. As I stepped down from the stage, I was immediately surrounded by well-wishers and reporters asking questions about my personal connection to the property. I answered briefly but politely, explaining that my family had owned the restaurant for many years and that bringing it into the Victoria Restaurant Group portfolio was a special full-circle moment in my career. All the while, I was acutely aware of my family standing rigidly at the edge of the crowd, watching. After about 20 minutes of mingling, the general manager approached me discreetly. "Your family has asked to speak with you privately," he said. "I have put them in the private dining room for privacy." I nodded, took a moment to compose myself, and headed toward the back of the restaurant. This was the confrontation I had both anticipated and dreaded for months. When I entered the private dining room, my family was standing in an awkward cluster near the windows overlooking the Detroit River. No one spoke as I closed the door behind me. Finally, my father broke the silence. "So this was your plan all along, to humiliate us publicly?" "No, Dad," I said evenly. "My plan was to save the business you built before you lost everything. By going behind our backs, by pretending to be some anonymous corporation," Brandon interjected, his face flushed with anger. "Would you have accepted my help if I had offered it directly?" I asked. "Would you have admitted to me how bad things had gotten?" My father's jaw tightened. "You had no right to interfere. This was our business, our legacy." "A legacy you were about to lose to foreclosure," I pointed out. "I paid well above market value for all 3 properties. I kept every single employee. I even ensured you could keep your home." "So we should be grateful?" my father scoffed. "Grateful that my own daughter swooped in like some savior to take over what we built?" "What you built and what Brandon nearly destroyed," I said, my composure finally slipping. Do you know how much debt he had accumulated? Do you realize you were 5 months away from losing everything? Brandon stepped forward, pointing his finger at me. You think you are so clever with your fancy restaurant chain and your business success, but you stole our family heritage. You took advantage of a difficult situation. I saved our family heritage, I corrected him. I preserved it and improved it. Everything I learned about restaurants started in this building, with this business. I may have built my career elsewhere, but I never forgot where I came from. My mother, who had been silent until now, touched my father's arm gently. Richard, perhaps we should listen to what Victoria has to say. The restaurant is beautiful now, better than it has been in years. He shrugged off her hand. It is not our restaurant anymore, it is hers. He turned to me, his expression heartening. You may own the building now, Victoria, but you will never understand what this place really meant to us, and you will never be welcome here as family. The words hit me like a physical blow. After everything I had accomplished, after literally saving them from financial ruin, my father was still unwilling to acknowledge my achievement or accept my help. These are our restaurants now, he continued, his voice rising. Ours, not yours. You will never step foot in our restaurants. I stood there momentarily speechless at the irony of his statement. He was claiming ownership of properties he had legally sold, standing in a room he no longer had any right to occupy, telling the actual owner she would never be welcome. Brandon seized on my silence. We should sue her for misrepresentation, he said to my father. She deliberately concealed her identity during the purchase. That has to be illegal. That was when I knew I had to set clear boundaries. This was no longer about family reconciliation. It was about protecting my business and the employees who depended on me. The sale was completely legal and transparent, I said, my voice steady once more. Every document was reviewed by your attorneys. There was no legal requirement for me to disclose my personal identity as the investor. I moved toward the door, then turned back to face them. I had hoped that seeing what I have accomplished might finally make you proud, or at least make you acknowledge that I was right about my abilities and my understanding of this business. Clearly, I was wrong about that. I looked directly at my father. You are welcome to remain in your apartment as agreed in the contract, but this dining room, like the rest of the restaurant, belongs to Victoria Restaurant Group now, and I expect you to treat our staff and our property with respect. With that, I left the room, closing the door quietly behind me. I managed to maintain my composure until I reached my private office, where I finally allowed myself a moment of grief for the family reconciliation that now seemed impossible. Later that evening, as the celebration continued and guests raved about the transformed property, I watched from a distance as my father and Brandon left the restaurant, their expressions dark. My mother lingered, looking around as if searching for me, but eventually followed them out. I had won the business battle decisively. The Motor City Grill, now the Roosevelt, was mine, saved from the brink of financial collapse and transformed into a showcase property. But in the process, I had confirmed what I had long suspected. My father would never accept me as a successful restaurateur in my own right, would never acknowledge that his daughter had not just matched, but far exceeded his own achievements in the industry. That night, alone in my hotel room, I made a difficult decision. If my father and brother could not respect boundaries and accept the new reality, I would have to enforce those boundaries myself, even if it meant further damaging our already strained relationship. The morning after the grand reopening, I met with my security team and the general manager of the Roosevelt. I explained the situation frankly. My father and brother were the former owners, but had reacted hostilely to the revelation of my identity. While they retained the right to live in their private apartment, as stipulated in our agreement, their VIP access to restaurant amenities was a courtesy, not a contractual obligation. Effective immediately, I instructed, please deactivate the VIP access cards issued to Richard and Brendan Marshall. My mother, Patricia, may retain her access. Please also brief all staff that the former owners no longer have authority to give instructions or override restaurant policies. The general manager nodded, though I could see he was uncomfortable with the situation. And if they become difficult about this change, then you contact restaurant security and, if necessary, local law enforcement, I said firmly. This is a business, and we will maintain professional standards of conduct from everyone, including former owners. After the meeting, I toured the property again, speaking with staff and addressing any issues that had arisen during the opening event. Everyone was in high spirits. The celebration had been a tremendous success, with glowing initial reviews from media and industry guests. The only shadow was the situation with my family, which I kept to myself as much as possible. That evening, I was working late in the management office when my phone rang. It was the front desk manager, her voice tense. "Miss Marshall, I am sorry to disturb you, but your father and brother are here. They tried to access the private dining area and their key cards were declined. They are quite upset." "I will be right down," I said, taking a deep breath to center myself. When I reached the main dining room, I found my father in a heated argument with the hostess, his voice carrying across the space. "This is ridiculous. I owned this restaurant for 30 years. How dare you tell me I cannot enter the private dining room?" Brandon stood beside him, arms crossed, while several diners looked on with uncomfortable expressions. This was exactly the scene I had hoped to avoid, a public confrontation that could damage the restaurant's reputation on its second day of operation. "Dad," I said calmly as I approached, "let us discuss this privately, please." He turned to me, face flushed with anger. "You did this. You canceled our access." "Yes, I did," I confirmed, keeping my voice low and steady. "After your behavior last night, it seemed appropriate to clarify boundaries. We can discuss this in my office, not in the dining room in front of customers." "We do not need to discuss anything," he snapped. "This is our restaurant and we will go where we please." A security officer had appeared discreetly nearby, alerted by the hostess. I nodded slightly to acknowledge his presence, but hoped his intervention would not be necessary. "Dad, this is no longer your restaurant. You sold it to Victoria Restaurant Group. You retained the right to your private residence, which we respect, but the public areas of the restaurant are under my management now." Brandon stepped forward. "This is how you treat family? By humiliating us in public?" "I am trying to avoid public humiliation by asking to speak privately. You are the ones creating a scene in the dining room." My father's face darkened further. "I do not need to ask permission to enter parts of my own restaurant. I demand to speak to the real manager, not my ungrateful daughter who thinks she knows better than everyone." That was when I knew I had to take a stand. Not just for myself, but for every employee watching this interaction and wondering who was really in charge. "Security," I called, and the security officer stepped forward immediately. "Please escort Mr. Marshall and his son back to their residence. They are welcome in their private apartment, but are no longer authorized to access restaurant operational areas or private facilities." My father stared at me in disbelief. "You would have me removed? Your own father?" "I would have any person causing a disturbance in my restaurant removed," replied evenly, "family or not." The security officer approached respectfully. "Sir, if you would please come with me." For a moment, I thought my father might refuse, might force an even more uncomfortable scene, but something in my expression must have conveyed my absolute resolution, because after a tense silence, he turned and walked towards the elevators, Brandon following reluctantly behind. As they left, I noticed several diners watching the interaction. I approached them with a professional smile. I apologize for any disturbance. We're working through some transition issues with the previous management. Can I offer you complimentary desserts to make up for the inconvenience? The diner seemed appeased, and the potential public relations crisis was averted. But I knew this was not the end of the conflict with my family. Later that night, my mother called me, her voice shaky. "Victoria, your father is furious. I have never seen him like this." "I am sorry, Mom," I said sincerely, "but he left me no choice. He cannot behave that way in a professional business environment." "He feels betrayed," she said. "We all were shocked by the revelation. But your father, this restaurant was his life's work. To have you take it over, even if you saved it from financial ruin, is humiliating for him." I sighed, feeling the weight of the situation. "Mom, I understand that, but I did not take it over out of spite or to humiliate him. I did it to preserve what he built, what our family built. Why can he not see that?" There was a long pause before she answered. "Your father has always been a proud man, Victoria. Too proud sometimes. And you have surpassed him in every way, which is difficult for a man like him to accept from anyone, especially his daughter." After we hung up, I reflected on her words. My mother had always been caught in the middle, never directly contradicting my father, but sometimes offering these small insights into his character, these subtle acknowledgments of his flaws. It was the closest she ever came to taking my side. The next morning, I invited her to meet me at my office in the restaurant. She arrived looking nervous, glancing around as if worried about being seen. "Your father does not know I'm here," she admitted as she sat down. "He has forbidden us from speaking to you." Instead of responding directly to that concerning statement, I gave her a thorough tour of the renovated property, explaining the improvements, the technology, the marketing strategy. I showed her the financial projections, the bookings already secured for the coming months, the positive reviews pouring in. "This is extraordinary, Victoria," she said as we finished the tour in my office. "I had no idea. The way your father talked about your career, I thought perhaps you were just working at some restaurant chain, not building all of this." "I tried to tell you," I said gently. "I sent articles, awards, information about each new property. Did you ever see any of it?" She looked down at her hands. "Your father, he would intercept mail from you. He would hang up if you tried to talk about your work. He did not want to hear about your success because it reminded him of his own failures." The admission stunned me. All those years of thinking my family simply didn't care about my achievements, when in reality, my father had been actively hiding them. "Mom, you need to understand something," I said, taking her hands in mine. "I did not do any of this to prove him wrong or to humiliate him. I did it to preserve what he built, what our family built. Why can he not see that?" There was a long pause before she answered. "Your father has always been a proud man, Victoria. Too proud sometimes. And you have surpassed him in every way, which is difficult for a man like him to accept from anyone, especially his daughter." After we hung up, I focused on stabilizing operations at the Roosevelt and preparing to return to New York full-time. My mother and I met several times, rebuilding our relationship as she finally learned about my career and accomplishments without my father's filtering. She began to share stories of her own early days in the restaurant business, insights and experiences she had never expressed when my father dominated all business conversations. Brandon, meanwhile, consulted with lawyers about challenging the sale of the restaurants. As I had expected, they informed him that the transaction was entirely legal. Victoria Restaurant Group had not misrepresented anything material to the sale. My personal identity as the investor behind the company was not a legally required disclosure. Undeterred by this legal reality, Brandon filed a lawsuit anyway, claiming fraud and coercion. The case was quickly dismissed by the court, but not before generating some unwanted publicity. Several industry publications ran stories about the family drama behind the acquisition, forcing me to address the situation more publicly than I had intended. I issued a simple statement. Victoria Restaurant Group acquired these properties through a standard business transaction at above market value, preserving jobs and improving the properties for the benefit of employees, customers, and the communities they serve. While I have a personal connection to the original Detroit property as a member of the founding family, all business dealings were conducted with the utmost professionalism and transparency. The statement was sufficient to calm the media interest, but the damage to my family relationships seemed irreparable. My father refused all contact. Brandon, embarrassed by the failed lawsuit, moved to Florida with his wife to start a food truck business, leaving the restaurant industry entirely. Only my mother maintained a relationship with me, gradually becoming more independent and confident in expressing her own opinions. As the Roosevelt established itself as one of Detroit's premier dining destinations, winning awards and attracting a loyal clientele, I focused on continuing to build Victoria Restaurant Group nationwide. We opened new properties in Denver, Portland, and Nashville, each maintaining our core values of accessible fine dining and personalized service. 3 years after the acquisition and confrontation, Victoria Restaurant Group had grown to 28 properties across the United States, with plans for international expansion. The small family business I had grown up in had become the foundation for something far larger, more successful than my father or brother had ever envisioned. Though the personal cost had been high, I had proven beyond any doubt what I always knew, that I understood the restaurant business, that I had the vision and determination to succeed in a competitive industry, and that I could build something remarkable on my own terms. Today, Victoria Restaurant Group continues to grow and thrive. The Roosevelt remains our flagship Midwest property, a testament to the power of transformation and renewal. My mother, now in her 70s, serves as an honorary advisor and mentor to young women entering the culinary industry. In her honor, I established the Patricia Marshall Scholarship for Women in Culinary Arts, providing education and internship opportunities for young women with limited resources but unlimited potential. Each year, I tell the scholarship recipients my story, not to dwell on the obstacles I faced, but to emphasize that their path may not be easy or straightforward, but persistence and self-belief can overcome even the most personal rejections. Sometimes the doors that others close in your face become the very reason you build your own house, with your own doors, your own keys, and your own rules about who gets to enter. The rejection that once caused me such pain became the catalyst for creating something far greater than I might have built had my path been easier. If you have ever been underestimated, dismissed, or shut out by the very people who should have supported you, know that their limitations do not define your potential. Their closed doors do not determine your destination. You can build your own empire, one where you not only have a place, but where you make the rules. Have you ever had someone underestimate you, only to prove them wrong in the end? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that rejection can be the beginning of something extraordinary, not the end of their story. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes when one door closes, you don't just find another one. You build an entire restaurant empire of your own.